You take over this team, and it is kind of a project where they've been not making the playoffs 3 straight years, first time in franchise history. Ideally, right, you get all this solved in one season, right? That's ideally. But realistically, how much time do you give yourself? I know there's an urgency to all this too.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of somewhat of a difficult question.
Yeah.
I think, there's an urgency to get back, to be successful, and kind of try and start another run here. They had so much success for so long. It was kind of a unique situation. So
right.
We want to get back there, but we also know that you can't skip steps to get there. So, whether that takes, a year or 2, 3, 4 years, I think we'll get there, and we're going to take the necessary steps and try and build this the right way.
I know you want to come in here and do things the right way. You want to establish something that can sustain and persist. How do you handle the other side of it where you're probably pretty urgent? And I mean, this team hasn't seen the playoffs in 3 years for the first time in franchise history, as crazy as that sounds. How do you balance urgency versus the right way?
Well, I think urgency is always secondary to that, because I think if every single day you approach doing things the right way and set a standard and a level of expectations that your players clearly understand, I don't think you really need to have that urgency. I think the winning and losing takes care of itself, and sometimes you find out about yourself through losing. We feel good about the direction we're going. Now we need to build on that. And we talked about that yesterday in practice, and we talked about that in practice today. It's not just in the games. We got to come with that mindset day in and day out, physically and mentally, with the mindset that we're going to get better.
Is there a certain aspect of, I've heard people say this, paying the price for all the success the Sharks had throughout the 2010s, that maybe the situation you find yourself in is a little bit paying for how good and how competitive this franchise was for so long?
I think so, for sure. I think sports are kind of cyclical that way. Mm-hmm. You have where you're kind of on top of the world, and the Sharks even extended it more than most teams. Most teams have, 5, 6, 7 years of success. The Sharks had almost 20.
Right.
And so when that happens, it's kind of inevitable that you end up on the other side of it, where you have some lean years, and when you're in the win now mode, you end up kind of trading some prospects and draft picks, and players get older as you're kind of going. So it's definitely a little bit of a price to pay, but I think everyone would say it's probably worth it, the success that they had. I know they didn't get the cup at the end of the day, but they were close many years, and it was a long, successful run.
When you knew that you were at least up for this job, or that you eventually took the job, did you go back on a lot of Sharks game tape from last year to figure out who these guys were on an everyday basis? Not like it was a complete surprise, but to really dive in deep?
It's funny, I started watching, and then I realized, we're going to play different than they did last year.
Right. What's the point?
It's no knock on someday, unfortunately, I'm going to lose my job, and there's going to be a new coach coming in here, and he's going to do something different. That's just, you coach to your DNA and to your personality, and I thought it would be almost unfair to do that. So I actually wanted to come in with a clean slate and judge the players by what I saw. So early on when I got the job, I think your instinct is, I got to watch, I got to find out an awful lot about it. And after watching a game or two, I just stopped and thought, I want to give everybody a clean slate, and we're going to go about doing things differently and judge them from that.
The casual Sharks fan might show up to a game this season and say, well, I recognize a lot of these players, so how different can this team actually be? But I do feel like under the hood, if the Sharks were a car, everything from the hockey side of it to the coaching staff, I think there's been a lot of changes that may not be seen necessarily in personnel on the ice. Can you describe how different you think this franchise is basically since the end of last season?
Well, I mean, there's just a lot of new faces, and what comes with that is kind of a different feeling. But, from our standpoint, it's kind of trying to change the culture a little bit and get people, get the group as a whole to be a little bit more competitive, a competitive group, harder to play against group. So hopefully when you do watch a game, even though there are a lot of players who've been here in the last couple of years, you'll see a group that's has a little bit more of an edge, a little bit more competitive, and it's kind of plays the kind of style of hockey that you need to play to win in this league.
Obviously, a head coach of any sport is a little bit of a delegator, right? You have a coaching staff, and they will do some of the heavy lifting too. But for you personally, how do you find yourself to be most impactful on a hockey team as the head coach?
Well, I think from a head coaching standpoint, it's a balancing act. When to be present, when to kind of put the pedal to the metal, and when to back it off. I equate it to driving a car. Sometimes you got to go 85, and sometimes you got to put it in neutral. And I think as a coach over the course of an 82-game season, you've got to have a feel of, when to back off and when to lean on them. And that's a balancing act. I feel very fortunate with the staff that we have. They can help me make those decisions. Certainly constantly talking with Mike and our front office. They're observant of what's going on here too. So, with the support staff we have here, I feel very fortunate in that regard. And, but to me, my number one responsibility is to put our team in the right mindset and make sure that we're well prepared.